year. The first one were called the Unionist Scouts, that were the Protestants. The second association was an association called Éclaireurs de France. Instead of Scouts, they took a new name, Éclaireurs. And this association was declared laïque. Laïque is a French mot that has no literal translation into English. So laïque is an adjective. Laïque could be translated into English in two different words, and none of them cover what properly the adjective laïque means. One is secular, and the other is lay. So, lay, this is not the...
Lay means for ordinary people, lay, common.
No, lay is, in Christianity, the lays are the ones that participate in the organization of the church, but are not priests or nuns. That would like me. And secular means absence of religion. But laïque in France has a very particular cultural meaning. It means separation of the power of the church to the power of the public institutions. So when Éclaireurs de France declare themselves a laïque association, means that it's an association where no external religious power could play any role in the association. So what you had in the United Kingdom was that Scouting spread, having churches or people participating in Scouting and creating Scout groups. So in Éclaireurs de France they said no church could create a Scout group in Éclaireurs de France because we don't accept the intrusion of an external religious institution on what Scouting should do. Well, this is very relevant because in 1920, there is the third thing. The third thing is that in 1919, I believe, the Catholic Church changes its position about Scouting. At the beginning of Scouting, the Catholic Church believed that Scouting was something wrong for two different reasons. The first, because it came from a Protestant country. And when Baden Powell was talking about religion, was talking about the religion of a place where the Queen was the head of the church. And it was talking about religion of a place where people had Lutheran beliefs. So the Catholic Church, first of all, said, this is something that goes against what Catholicism was. But the second thing is that Scouting had many elements in common with Masonry. Are you familiar with what Masonry is?
No, no idea. It's totally new. We are not religious people in Taiwan either.
Oh, no. No, but this is So, the Masons were a society, not properly secret, but kind of a society based on membership that were very strong in England, that had particular beliefs. One of them was the idea that it was the big architect of the universe. The other one was that they were totally committed with the idea that all humans were equal. The other one was the idea that you had a world brotherhood of people belonging to the Masonry. And also the idea that Masons should do things in favor of society, some kind of things that allow society to evolve. could see that all these elements are quite familiar when you read things related to Scouting. There is nothing proved about direct belonging of Baden-Powell to the Masonry. All the things that I've read is that people say that it might be an influence, but there is that most probably Baden-Powell was never a Mason. But Masonry, that was quite, let's say, acceptable in the Anglo-Saxon world. And if you go today to London, you have a big building of a Mason lodge. In Catholic countries, was considered something very bad. Masonry was prosecuted, or was considered to be a secret society that was fighting against the truth of Catholic religion. Because Masonry, as somehow Anglicanism do, was quite a relative on the idea of truth. So what they say is, it's good that you have beliefs. It's good that you have an inner you. It's good that you have a moral reference. But that doesn't allow you to kill someone because he has a different belief that you have, or because he worships a God with a different faith than the God that you have. Whereas Catholicism in that time was fighting for the hegemony in society. So what happened at the end of the 1910s was that Catholic Church realized that Scouting was being very successful. The spread of Scouting was very fast. Not only in Anglo-Saxon countries, but mostly in European Catholic countries as well. So, and then you have a third focus. You have the British focus, you have the French and Catholic focus. And then you have the American focus. In America, the relation with religion is very different than in Europe. They say America is not, in America, or America as a country, don't have a particular religion. But in the dollar coins, it says, in God we trust. So, in the United States, you have an approach to religion that is omnipresent and at the same time is very diverse. So it's an approach that does not contemplate the possibility that a person do not believe in God, but is not fighting on what this belief means. It's like you believe whatever you want, but the normal thing is that you believe in something. So when Scouting appeared in the States, they assumed this thing of the culture of the States. Well, this is very relevant because when Scouting became a world movement organized in 1920, since 1920, you have these three big approaches clashing on them. You have the world organization recognizing at the same time the French Protestants, the French Catholics, and the French laïc Scouts. But you also recognize the Americans, and you recognize the British. So the World Organization takes the writings of Baden-Powell and says, all Scouts should have a religion. But that has different meanings. For the British is, all Scouts should behave in the normal thing that, in the normal way that people behave in our society, which is to have some beliefs, not to be a person that don't care about the others. In the American society means your moral reference is mostly defined by your religion. No. And in France, could mean three different things. It could mean, if you are Catholic, all Scouts have a religion means you must obey the Pope in Rome. If you are Protestant means you could have a reference in a Catholic country of some kind of Christianity that is not the one that is mainstream in France, and in the laïc way that you could develop your spiritual dimension with without being tutorized by any particular church. Okay. What happened though is that in the late 1940s, early 1950s, there is another important, I said that was not short. There is another important thing, which is the Cold War. So after this, obviously, it comes with the decolonization, the introduction and scouting of the references of Hinduism, of Buddhism, of Islam, and those things Baden-Powell is very focused on. He's permanently saying we have to accept all religious approaches. And Baden-Powell himself never used, he used many times many references of Hinduism in his writings or in his, even in his Christmas postcards. So he was very ecumenical in the approach. But what happened in the Cold War is that communism, when Stalin won the war against the Germans, and all Europe is super weak, the possibility for the whole Europe to be under control of the Stalinist regime of Russia was real. All Europe was economically destroyed. So it was very easy. And if you see what happened in the Eastern European countries, what happened is that because the poverty, communist parties entered into the power, and they had a very strong strategy directed by Moscow to jeopardize social democrats, to accuse social democrats of being weak, and then to do a coup d'etat and transform regimes into communist regime. So that was very close to happen in France and in Italy as well. And particularly in Germany. So the United States did the Marshall Plan to try to balance this. But the ones that were closer to the anti-religion discourse were the communists. So in the 1950s, to be non-religious was much close to be communist. So in the time of persecution to communism in America, particularly in the time of MacArthur, the role of religion took power, not because religion itself, but because the absence of religion was a sign of communism. So Boy Scouts of America, and that had been, I read a particular document that explained a big debate that happened in the World Scout Conference in the 50s. Boy Scouts of America tried to force the World Organization to say that any association that had that do not have an explicit reference to religion should be excluded, including the French one and all the former colonies of French that became also laïc. So in most former French colonies, you have laïc scouting. You know what I mean? So in Senegal, in Côte d'Ivoire, so what the Americans were saying is, laïc scouting, this is not scouting. Let's get rid of it. So it was a big clash in the World Conference, and at the end, it was a compromise, saying, okay, we are not going to exclude the ones that exist, but we are going to make clear that no new cases could happen like the ones that happened in the early times. So the very interesting thing, and let me go back to the idea of critical thinking, is that sometimes when we talk about scout history or about contents, people in scouting forget the critical thinking and take the legend and reproduce the legend. instead of trying to critically analyze what happened and whether what happened in that moment is now right or not. So today, what we see is that many references about religion and scouting is the consequence of 40 years of creating a public discourse in World Scouting as if Baden-Powell was a religious integrist. But he was not. And if you take the readings, what he says is, you want to see a temple, you go to nature. This is the biggest temple. Because if you go there, you see everything on creation. He's not talking about the Bible. He's not talking about the He's not talking about the creation. He's talking about the basic values of coexistence, and also the elements that make people to be grateful, that make people to develop an inner sense, to make people to feel sense of brotherhood to the others, based on the feeling that we share something that is bigger than our physical characteristics, or the gender, or the nationality. And those elements, he said, are on the base of our religions. And to me, this is what is relevant. So, it's very important to understand that in the last years, many countries have been evolving. And the most relevant on this issue, and the most relevant of them, is the United Kingdom, that a few months ago modified its promise to be able to include scouts that do not believe in God. So today, the promise of the Scout Association, approved also by the World Organization, is open to scouts that do not believe in God. Because British Scouts, and I agree with them, say the relevant thing is not whether you say that you believe in God or not. It's whether your behavior is consistent with the values that a religion expresses or not. If you say, I do believe in God, and you discriminate, that doesn't count. We prefer people that are consistent with their values, than people that put here the pin with the sign of their religion, and then are being inconsistent with it. I don't know if that answered the question.
Yeah, I got, you told me something new, and yeah, it's very good. And I also understand why you had Boy Scouts America.
Okay, Dr. Vallory, I admire your research work for several reasons. Because you mentioned the value of coexistence is the basic value of scouting. Is that your interpretation?
Yeah. So values of coexistence, or values of living together. The translation would be, so the idea of,
but is this your idea, or you summarize?
No, but it's my interpretation.
Yeah.
So when you take the values, and you try to explain which values, because each country, one country adds something, the other, values of coexistence, basic values of living together.
Then you've got another credit. Yeah, because you say that the basic values of scouting is coexistence, and then everybody in the world will copy you what you're saying, and that's your credit. It's great.
Thank you.
And also, I noticed that you mentioned inclusive values several times, and I know that it's very important. Is that also your invention, your term?
Yeah, well, my definition. So they are in opposition of exclusionary, because it's permanently, all these statements of World Scouting have been focused on not leaving anyone outside.
Yeah.
So it's inclusive in the sense that it's coexistence for everybody.
Then you use the word inclusive. Because why I noticed this word. I know in English, but I find it's very, very difficult to
say something. In the word of expression, coexistence or living together, I also had problem of translation because it first came to my mind in Catalan. And in Catalan, we have something called convivencia. Convivencia is to live together. And then I found that convivencia is a term that does not exist in English. So when we analyze Scouting, we always have problems because Scouting is also adapted to many different societies with many different languages and different contexts. For instance, the term leadership does not exist in French. So when we talk about leadership and you go to France, you have to try to understand the concept, not only the word. When you go to an Anglo-Saxon country and you talk about laïc, this is not immediately translated. So the problem with the Scouting is that if it's only based on translation of text, you could be wrong. You need to understand the basics, the things that are properly shared by everybody. And that's why I think the concept of inclusive values of coexistence is something that
I think that's also one of your major practices in Scouting literature.
Thank you very much.
我们好像在聊天，拉你们来作陪，不好意思。
Okay. I have studied one subject, maybe just we talk about different countries scouting, what's special in different countries scouting. I don't know how to translate. Okay. 各国同学运动。
各国we have a course says scouting movements in different countries.
Yeah. Okay. That's a So I know you have to go around the world. So after I study this class, I don't know much. So could you share some experience, maybe your first image or your experiences? What maybe just interesting story or from social factor or social reality? Okay. What's the difference in your image? Different Asia scouting, or Europe scouting, your country scouting, or Africa scouting?
Well,
yeah.
Is there anything different?
Yeah, just compare
Yeah.
interesting story.
Well, let's say that this is a little bit endless because every time that we create, let's take the case of Taiwan. So you have Taiwan that has a particular history, but now we are 2014, right? And the society of Taiwan 50 years ago was quite similar of the society of mainland China. But today, the society of Taiwan is quite different from the society of mainland China. This is the result of life. You separate and people create things, take choices, do things, and go one way or another. That also happened in associations. So when the Scout Association appear in a country, there are two elements that make them different from the Scout Associations in other countries. First of all, the social reality. The way they see the relation between adults and young people. The way they see gender. The way they see education. The way they see the role of individuals. All of these impact the way scouting works. But also, another element is what I called the association culture. Because in this association, a particular group of people are going to make choices about symbology, uniform, names, age groups. And all these things are just choices. They could have been done in a very different way. They could have decided that the uniform is green, that instead of trousers you have skirts, that you instead of hats you have a traditional, I don't know, strange thing in your head, and that instead of these particular age groups you have another one. But with the years, each association developed their particular cultural identity. And this particular cultural identity become, with the time, their identity. So, because Scouting is volunteer, with this identity could happen two things. One thing is that this identity is properly well adapted to the reality of the country, and then more people join Scouting, and Scouting continue evolving. Another thing that could happen is that this identity goes far from the reality of the society, less people join the Scouting, and Scouting becomes something strange for society. So when you try to analyze what makes Scouting different in every country, you always have to combine these two elements. One element is the element of how this society is, and the other element is the element on how the people living the association took the choices. Now, that said, I do believe that there is something universal on how young people and human beings learn. That there is something universal on the dreams that people have, on the ways people want to have a fulfilling life. And that there is something universal on how people want to live in society that do not discriminate them. This is something universal. And it's funny because you go to a country where they are having strong discrimination to women, and they say, oh, you know, in our country it's different. Women like to be like this. Women like not to drive. Women like to be 100% covered and not being seen. This is the normal thing. Women like not to go out of home. Women like not to decide. And then you go to another country and they say, oh no, our society is different. In our society, young people don't like to take decisions. In our society, young people don't want to think for themselves. In our society, young people like to learn what all people want them to do and do it. And this is a society thing. And in other society, they would say, oh no, in our society, it's normal to discriminate Chinese people because they are strange, you know. And here, I don't know, in Malaysia, we like them to be kind of separated. They are more comfortable like this. But there is something universal on people not wanting to be discriminated. All people, all human beings. And there is something universal on how people learn. And there is something universal on how people have dreams. And the most evident point when you see this is when you see kids that are 4, 5, 6 years old playing. In all societies, you see the same patterns, the same sparkling in the eyes, and the same smiles, the same relations. And somehow I think that Scouting is the answer on how these kids could fulfill their dreams. And the way they adapt in societies should only be justified in doing it in the best possible way in each society to fulfill this dream of societies where individuals without discrimination could be the real protagonist of their life.
Okay, another question. Okay, you want the factor leader okay. First time you have focused on this subject, global education or global.
Citizenship.
Yeah. Okay, have your direction and change. Or could you share us how to change? Oh, in the first time you have focused on no change.
Oh, what do you mean? I don't understand.
I would say maybe when we do research, we will change our direction, our source, or anything, right? Maybe, okay. For example,
You mean that I started focusing on global citizenship education,
yes.
and then I jumped more into education?
Yeah, if you, like for example, when I first had it, our study subject is outdoor education. Okay, so outdoor education. Oh, I will change my can be no leisure. Okay, no leisure, and maybe final post oh, scouting education.
Yeah.
Okay.
Okay. Well, there are two answers to this. One is that because I have a philosophy background, I tend to be very radical in the philosophical term, meaning to try to go to the basic thing that could explain everything. So I made a big effort to try to understand what was the element or the elements that could explain scouting in any given society. Something that avoided the relativism. I'm saying, oh, you know, here is this, here is there. So we call that this is a global movement, but it's not. So I try to do that. But the other explanation is that, as you know, the PhD dissertations are a working process. So you do some discoveries, and when you do this research, you present it, and you have a committee that help you to make this thesis better. And this is precisely what happened to me, because I invited a person that I respect a lot, both intellectually and for his actions. That was Jacques Morillon. Jacques Morillon was the Secretary General of WASM until 2004. And Jacques Morillon had also a PhD in sociology. And I think that he intellectually was very good in scouting to focus on the idea that scouting should realize its educational purpose. And he was focusing on it. So when he came to my thesis committee, he came with this book with millions of notes. The book, the dissertation, yeah, totally, it's like millions of notes. And he gave me lots of ideas. The most important thing, he said, Eduard, you are wrong in one thing. You state in several points of the dissertation that the purpose of scouting is citizenship education. And you forget that the main purpose is education of individuals. And I realized that this is so self-evident that it suddenly opened my eyes. Because it's obvious that if you don't empower individuals, you cannot make them citizens. So you cannot do citizenship education without first having free individuals. And this is what scouting does. So it was then when I discovered that educating for global citizenship is something that you can only do if you have self-fulfilled autonomous individuals. And that's why I always start stating the purpose of scouting, which is this contributing to self-education of young people.
Oh, you have the similar ideas with the doctors who got PhD in South Africa. Talking about the philosophy of it, also about autonomy. That's great. I really hope that, as you see, you know, Dr. Vallory is very knowledgeable and enthusiastic and friendly and energetic. I really hope that he can stay with us longer, but you know, for the present it's impossible. Okay, but anyway, we say thank him very, very much. Let's give him an applaud. And I know you have the class in 10 minutes, so you are free to go now. Let's give him an applause.